This channel is part of the History Hit network.
These people are destroying the evidence, erasing every memory of what went on here. This was Station X, a mysterious institution buried deep in the English countryside, the Allies' best-kept secret of World War II.
Everything was destroyed. There wasn't a scrap left.
In 1940, Britain stood alone against Hitler. Defeat seemed inevitable. Her cities were being battered and bombed. In the Atlantic, German U-boats were wreaking havoc. Surrender was only weeks away. But Churchill had a secret weapon, the most curious military establishment anywhere in the world. Crossword fanatics, chess champions, mathematicians, schoolboys, and professors, all with one common aim: to smash the mighty German code machine, the Enigma. The machine that carried all the secret German war plans. Unless they could unlock the mystery of the Enigma, the war would be lost. What happened here was one of the most remarkable stories of the Second World War. How a bunch of untrained youngsters who had never seen a code in their life unraveled the Enigma. Never in the history of warfare had one side known so many of the enemy's secrets. What went on here was to remain hidden for 30 years. Tonight's program revisits Station X and unlocks the secrets of the men and women who changed the face of the 20th century. In World War II, Hitler introduced a new kind of warfare: blitzkrieg. Lightning attacks by tanks and planes together brought Europe to its knees. Speed was everything, and speed of attack meant speed of communication. The Second World War became the wireless war. Every day, the skies were full of radio signals. The German High Command had trained thousands of wireless operators in preparation for the conquest of Europe. The operator's job was to be able to interpret the staccato tones of Morse code in any conditions. But there was still the problem of how to keep the messages secret. The Germans had developed the most elaborate code-making device the world had ever seen. The Enigma turned a message into unintelligible gibberish, letter by letter. When the message was sent in Morse code, all the enemy saw was a meaningless string of letters. But when the German operator at the other end typed in the coded letters, the real message would appear. In this way, vital war plans could be kept absolutely secret. The High Command never doubted that the Enigma messages were unbreakable by the enemy. They were so confident that they used the Enigma throughout the German war machine. They never imagined what was about to happen at Station X. This is the machine the German High Command believed would protect their secrets. This is the Enigma.
The complexity is enormous. I mean, if I sent just one message on an Enigma machine today, it would still take a super Cray computer, the fastest in the world, a year to go through searching for that one message without supporting evidence as to what that message might have been.
Long before the war began, the airwaves were full of coded messages as Hitler prepared for battle. The British knew they would have to break the Enigma. In 1938, the British Secret Service bought Bletchley Park, an ungainly mansion 50 miles north of London. This was to be the new code-breaking headquarters. A wireless receiver was installed to pick up German messages. Its call sign was Station X, and that became the unit's new name. A new breed of codebreakers would be required to unravel the mysteries of the Enigma. The Secret Service set about finding their people. The interviewing began.
The people who a few years earlier were regarded as too young and not knowing anything of importance, or not being real people, not being significant grown-up people, suddenly they were the people who held the keys to the Reich.
Code breaking was a somewhat esoteric profession, but it wasn't clear exactly who would make a good code breaker. People who were recruited were asked whether they did crossword puzzles, and if they said they did and enjoyed doing them and did them well, that was generally enough to get you in. We discovered people of a whole variety of backgrounds did very well. Anthropologists, Egyptologists, paleontologists, and even an occasional lawyer turned out to have the knack.
Station X was becoming a unique wartime institution. Military discipline, uniforms, differences between civilians and the forces, all that didn't matter. The sole imperative was to break the Enigma, and to break it as quickly as possible.
At that age, you can just take fire and blaze away, half out of your mind with enthusiasm and dedication. You're not married, you don't have to worry about the kids and the rent and so forth. And during that sort of short period of your life, you can live like a madman and, take almost no sleep and determined to do it.
The new technology of the Enigma meant a new approach to code breaking. Mathematicians were enlisted, the most brilliant in the country. Station X was all set to become the largest code-breaking establishment the world had ever seen. If the Germans ever discovered what was about to happen at Station X, the whole enterprise would collapse. Secrecy was paramount, to the point of obsession. Some didn't even know what they were being recruited for.
Most of us who were among the, what shall I say, the hoi polloi, the lower grades, never knew what went on at Bletchley Park. The only time I realised what we were actually doing was when I was shown a code book which had just been captured and rushed to Bletchley from a captured plane. And, of course, we had no plastic envelopes or anything then. The poor thing was just given to me as it was, and I was horrified to see a huge blood stain on it. The blood round the edges was drying, but the blood in the middle was still wet, and I realised then that somewhere was this German air crew bleeding, still bleeding, while I was decoding. I was writing out in modern German their new code book. And that did bring the war very close.
German confidence in the Enigma was not without reason. The Enigma was state-of-the-art technology. German operators could scramble their messages in millions and millions and millions of different ways. Pressing a typewriter key would light up a totally different letter. An electrical current was sent from the keys to the letters through a series of rotors. Each time a key was pressed, a rotor would turn, changing the wiring, and so changing the letter that was produced.
The total number of ways in which the Enigma machine can be configured for any particular message is 150 million. So it was an enormous complexity, which was why the Germans thought it was completely safe.
The Enigma was first developed as a commercial machine in the 1920s and even patented in London. German banks and the railways were among its first customers, but the German military were quick to see that it was ideal for war. German operators in the field received secret instructions from base on how to set up the machine for each day. They had to make 3 adjustments to the Enigma so that the senders and receivers' machines would match. First, which rotors to put into the machine and in what order.
The rotors contained one of the central secrets of the Enigma machine, which was the cross wiring inside the wheels. The whole of this maze of wiring inside changed every time a letter was entered, and that's what gave the Enigma machine its vast complexity.
Secondly, to confuse the enemy even more, each of the rotors could be changed every day by adjusting the ring of letters around each rotor, 26 combinations on each wheel. The third step was the plug board. Using his secret instructions for the day, the operator could plug up each typewriter key to a totally different letter.
This is what the Germans thought was the killer cryptographically. This plug board enabled you to transpose letters completely, a pair of letters. Now, because there are 26 sockets on the front of the Enigma machine, you can plug these pairs of letters together in an absolutely astronomical number of combinations, about 1.5 million combinations that you can use on the front.
Once the machine was set up, the message was encoded letter by letter. These coded letters were then sent by Morse to the receiver at the other end. The Germans believed that with the Enigma, they had a foolproof system. Station X had never seen an Enigma. All they had were groups of 5-letter code and endless patience. And in these first months, the new recruits were getting nowhere.
At the beginning of the war, there was a great difficulty because although we had intercepts which we knew were enciphered using the Enigma machine, we didn't know enough detail about the machine to be able to even begin to find any method of breaking it. Unless you've got the exact key, you just cannot get anywhere with it at all. And this is a major difference from any code systems prior to that the Enigma machine, there's no sense of nearness. You're not nearly at a solution. You've either got the solution or you haven't got the solution.
The story of how the Enigma was broken began 9 years earlier with a spy. In 1931, a German army clerk, Hans Thilo Schmidt, saw an easy way to make money and sold stolen documents to the French Secret Service. The French met with their own cryptographers. They showed them the documents but got little response. War then seemed a long way off. Next, the Enigma material went to the British. At that stage, the British cryptographers were not convinced by mechanical code making, and Germany didn't seem much of a threat. The offer was politely declined. Finally, the stolen documents went to the Poles. With Germany breathing down their necks, The response from them was very different. As soon as the Poles saw what was on offer, a deal was struck. With the stolen documents, 3 brilliant young Polish mathematicians, Zygalski, Różecki and Rajewski, set to work on the Enigma. The Poles soon realized that they had to find out how the Germans had wired the Enigma's keyboard to the first rotor. The number of possible wiring orders was astronomical, as any typewriter key could be wired to any letter on the rotor. But if the Poles could work this out, they would be a long way towards breaking the Enigma.
Rajewski had a flash of inspiration, and he thought, what about if they'd been stupid enough to just use ABCD as the order round the rotor? And they had. All the multitude of millions and millions of ways in which they could have scrambled the connection from the keyboard to the entry point, and they'd just chosen A, B, C, D. And Marian Rajewski, in desperation, tried that. It worked, and suddenly he'd got the internal connections of the whole of the German forces machine.
But then, on the eve of the invasion of Poland, the Germans introduced even more complications to the Enigma, and the Poles could no longer read any of the messages. They needed help. Out of desperation, they invited the British to a secret meeting deep inside a forest near Warsaw. They revealed how they had managed to break the Enigma. The British were astonished.
And Diddy Knox, he was one of the members of the team that went there. And the first thing he asked Rajewski was, what is this mapping from the keyboard to the entry rotor? And Rajewski said, ABCD. And Diddy Knox went, oh, God, we never thought of that. It's too obvious. Why didn't we think of that?
Within weeks of that meeting, Poland was invaded and war broke out. But the changes that the Germans had made to the Enigma meant that even with the Polish information, Station X was still in the dark. But as the flow of German messages increased, at last the codebreakers were beginning to see a way to achieve the impossible. The starting point was the messages themselves. The worldwide network of intercept stations was one of the last great achievements of the old British Empire, stretching from Scarborough to Singapore. They were known as Y stations.
Wherever the Germans were, we were listening. When there was a lot of excitement, the wires would be absolutely humming with Morse. They'd be transmitting all over the place. We'd really have cramp in our fingers sometimes, trying to write it down non-stop.
Round the clock, round the world, thousands of operators were writing down meaningless but vital groups of letters. The raw material for Station X. In 1940, the codebreakers had their first breakthrough. The German operators were making a tiny error in the way they were setting up their machines. It was known as the double indicator. It was to be the Enigma's Achilles heel. The instruction sheets for each day had told the German operator how to set up his Enigma. The rotors and the ring of letters around each rotor were put into their given positions. The sheets then specified how the plug board should be wired up. All Enigmas on a network had to be set up identically for the system to work. But there was more, one extra level of security. If the enemy captured the instruction sheets, they would be able to read all the messages. To prevent this, each and every message had its own secret rotor setting, chosen by the operator himself. To do this, the operator first turned the rotors to 3 letters chosen at random. These would be sent by Morse to the operator at the other end in plain text, so that he could line up his machine similarly.
But now the operator had to be able to tell the operator at the receiving end what the actual message settings from which he was going to start enciphering the message. And that had to be conveyed to the operator at the other end, but not revealed to any interceptor. And the way that they chose to do this was to use the Enigma machine itself to conceal this message setting.
The operator encodes a second group of 3 letters as the secret message setting itself.
And supposing he thought of SWJ. And when he keys in SWJ, the lamps light up ITV. Because the Germans felt that radio transmissions might be unreliable, they went a step further, and they actually asked the operator at the sending end to key in the message setting twice. So the procedure was to key in SWJ, SWJ, and to note down all 6 lamps that lit. And that was a crucial mistake, because the repetition of the message setting gives a cryptographer a toehold into finding out what it actually is. Repetitions are always bad news in cryptography.
By encoding the same letters twice, the Germans were giving the code breakers their first clue as to how the rotors were set on the Enigma. Soon there was a second clue. Station X noticed a strange quirk in the way the rotors worked. In about 1 out of 8 intercepts, the Enigma was turning one of the letters in the message setting into the same coded letter twice. This repeat should never have happened. The mistake of sending the message setting twice was revealing a flaw in the machine itself. Although it was designed to produce random coded letters, there were certain situations in which the Enigma was much less random than the Germans would have hoped.
There is no such thing as a truly random sequence that can be generated by a purely deterministic machine that just cannot be. It's part of the definition of randomness that it cannot be explained or predicted in any way whatsoever. The whole game of cipher design is to design machines which are flawed, they have to be, but in which the flaws are as small, inconspicuous as possible.
It was just such a flaw that finally broke the Enigma. Station X called the repeated letters females. There could only be a few configurations that could produce these females. If the code breakers now worked their way through them, they would find that day's settings. The code breakers produced huge cards, known as Jeffreys sheets, with holes punched through in an alphabetical grid representing the wheel positions that could produce females. By lining the sheets over each other, Station X could hunt through the wheel positions to find out how the Enigma had been set up for that day.
They were John Jeffreys, they were really his rather special baby. And they were on sort of cartridge weight paper, not very thick card. They got very dog-eared. And as far as I remember, they were 2 alphabets, that way and that way. It was like solving a very difficult crossword puzzle. You could actually see it happening. And the triumph when you found it worked, that was fascinating.
Marvellous, absolutely marvellous. There's nothing like seeing a code broken. That is really absolutely the tops.
The one thing that was very interesting was that people were very reluctant to go home at the end of the shift. There was a certain amount of move over, that let me sit down, People wanted to hang in there.
On one occasion, I was on the evening shift, but when midnight came, I was stuck in a message that had gripped me so hard I worked right through till breakfast time, from 4 o'clock in the afternoon till breakfast the next day, simply because this had to get done.
In the spring of 1941, the naval war was building up in the Mediterranean. Hitler had joined forces with the Italian fascist Mussolini. Both dictators were dreaming of new world empires. The codebreakers knew that the Germans had given the Italians Enigma machines to encode their communications. A 19-year-old girl was trying to break into the Italian messages.
Sometimes you'd have to spend the whole night assuming every position that there could be on the 3 different wheels, and there we call them red, blue and green, the wheels. I think they did too. So that you would have to work at it very, very hard, and it was that, I think, that made one pink-eyed, and one, after you'd done it for a few hours, you wondered, whether you'd ever see anything when it was before your eyes, because you were so snarled up in it all.
Mavis and the other codebreakers didn't know it, but they were about to make their first major impact on the war.
The one that came up was real good stuff, drama. Today's the day -3, just that, nothing else. And so, of course, we knew that something was going to happen. The Italians were going to do something in the Italian Navy in 3 days' time. Why they had to say that, I can't imagine. It seemed rather daft, but still, they did.
The British fleet was based in the Egyptian port of Alexandria under the command of Admiral Andrew Cunningham. A message about to arrive at Station X was going to make him and Mavis heroes.
Well, then a very, very large message came in, which was the battle orders, how many cruisers there were and how many submarines were to be there and where they were to be at such and such a time. Absolutely incredible that they should really spell it all out.
Mavis had decoded just the message that Cunningham needed to hit the Italians hard.
It was 11 o'clock at night and it was pouring with rain when I ran, absolutely tore down to take it to the Italian intelligence to get it across to Cunningham.
Within hours, the decoded message was on its way to Cunningham in Egypt. The Italian fleet were gathering off Cape Matapan on the Greek coast. Their plan was to attack a British convoy at midnight. Alexandria was a nest of spies. The problem for Cunningham was how to act on the message without giving his plans away. If he led the fleet out to sea, the Italians would know immediately. Cunningham embarked on an elaborate ruse to fool the spies. He wanted his enemies to believe that all was quiet.
He did a real Drake on them, and, well, more than Drake, because he played golf and pretended he was, just going to have a weekend off.
Admiral Cunningham was a crafty fellow, and by subterfuge he was able to lead the enemy to think he was socially engaged doing something else. And I've no doubt when he went ashore in Alexandria to play golf, that information was in Italy within about 5 minutes.
But at night, Cunningham slipped back on board and led the British fleet out to sea, to the precise spot where the Italians were gathered. The ruse worked. Cunningham caught the Italians completely off guard. That night, the Italians lost nearly 3,000 men, the cream of their navy. It was the first major victory for Station X in the war, and the young codebreakers were delighted.
The Navy does it again. Here is the British Mediterranean fleet, preparing for what proved to be the greatest naval engagement so far fought in this war. The Battle of Matapan is one more proof that Britain is the unchallenged ruler of the Mediterranean waves.
After the Battle of Matapan, the Navy were the heroes. Station X was, of course, never mentioned, but they had their own reward.
Then Cunningham himself came. It was the first thing he wanted to do when he came was to see the actual message that had been broken. And he was very nice, and we had a drink, and we were in this little cottage, and the walls had just been whitewashed. Now this will show you how sort of silly and young and giggly we were, but we thought it would be jolly nice if we could talk to Admiral Cunningham and to get him to lean against the wet whitewash and go away with a white stern. So that's what we did. So it's rather terrible, isn't it? That on the one hand, everything seems to be so very organised, and these silly young things are wanting to snare the Admiral.
But Station X's joy was to be short-lived.
And then disaster struck. The Germans issued a decree: no more double enciphering of the message setting, just single enciphering. Catastrophe. Suddenly, the Jeffreys sheets didn't work, and so suddenly, darkness fell.
Hitler was determined to grind Britain into submission. The Blitz, relentless attacks on major cities, became a part of everyday life. It was a war of blood and nerves.
Well, there was one very good remark, is the only good German is a dead one. We felt very, very strongly. Well, they'd bombed us. They'd every day, every night, with Heinkels and Dorniers. They'd killed a lot of people in London and in the cities. You couldn't have any pity for the Germans under those circumstances.
What a triumph the life of these battered cities is over the worst that fire and bomb can do.
In these, the grimmest days of war, Station X was Churchill's one glimmer of hope. Access to the enemy's innermost secrets could make the difference between victory and defeat. The codebreakers were working around the clock to break the Enigma. Station X had divided into huts to attack different parts of the German war machine. Hut 6 was concentrating on the Air Force Enigma. Ironically, it was the technologically advanced Luftwaffe that was the most vulnerable. The German Air Force had a high regard for itself as the new elite, but they were hopeless at security. They were ripe for breaking. For months, Station X had been listening in to the secret messages from German airfields to their headquarters in Berlin, but without being able to understand a word of them. Now they must find a way, and quickly. Hitler was preparing to invade Britain.
It's like looking for something in a dark room. One didn't really know what one was looking for. And I thought, but I had great confidence. I felt, I'm going to find some way to break back into the red.
Herrevel turned his thoughts to the Enigma operator. There were set procedures to be carried out to prepare each Enigma for that day's messages. The settings of the rotors and the Ringstellung, the alphabet ring around the rotors, were vital. If the secret instructions were not followed in exact detail, the security of the whole system would be at risk. But John Herrivel discovered that the operators were then making a fatal mistake. It became known as the Herrivel tip.
What the operator should do, of course, is when they've done a setting on a cipher machine, you should always spin the wheels so that it randomizes the position. But the whole of the Herrivel tip depended on the German operator either being under pressure or lazy and not doing that.
The operator would have to send the 3 random letters by Morse to the person at the other end so that both machines would be set to the same start position. But Herrivel realized that if the operator had failed to spin his rotors as he should, then the 3 letters he was sending over the airwaves, uncoded, would be the secret Ringstellung. Instructions were quickly sent out to the Y stations where the German messages were intercepted to pay particular attention to the first of each day's messages. That's when the mistake would show up, if it was going to show up at all. Hut 6 studied the opening letter groups of the intercepts as fast as they arrived to see if the Herrivel tip had worked. Sometimes the operator had made only a half-hearted attempt to spin the rotors, so LWZ had become LYB, just a click or 2 away, or perhaps LUX. But as more and more letter groups were plotted, the codebreakers began to see clusters of letters that revealed the original secret setting. Herrivel's tip was working. Not one operator, but many had all made similar mistakes. At last, Luftwaffe Red was broken. The codebreakers could now give the RAF vital details of how the Luftwaffe was organized and what it was planning. Even if they didn't always know exactly where or when.
You don't get a message saying, we are going to do the following great things in the next 6 months, a year, signed Hitler. There's nothing like that at all. You don't get anything on a plane. There's a case of an intercept which consisted entirely of figures, random figures. Someone says, I wonder if they are coordinates on a map, and they all turn out to be airfields. You did, in fact, get from that they were readying and building up airfields because they were going to concentrate their forces on attacking Britain.
Hut 6 broke the Air Force Enigma every day till the end of the war, and soon they discovered other mistakes that the operators were making. Every Morse code message could be intercepted by the enemy. So the Germans had to find a way of transmitting the settings for each message that only the Enigma operator would be able to figure out. They thought they had found the perfect solution. Use the Enigma itself to disguise the setting. The operator had already been told to think up 3 random letters for the initial rotor setting. Now he was told to think up 3 more and type them into the Enigma. They would be the key for that particular message, and since they were being encoded, they could be transmitted in complete safety.
On the surface, it looks like a foolproof indicator system. The true setting of the message is hidden. However, the weakness was leaving the selection of the 3 letters to the operator at random, and human beings simply are not random.
Hut 6 soon saw connections between the 2 sets of supposedly random letters. Once they had got the first 3 letters, which were sent in plain text, they could often guess the second 3, which were in code. One operator called Walter became legendary at Station X. Every day he would set his rotors to the first 3 letters of his name, and then type in the first 3 letters of his girlfriend's name, Clara. The codebreakers loved them.
One wonderful one, the outside indicator was Tom, and we thought, oh, Tom, we thought that didn't work. It was Tom Mix, the American cowboy actor from the 1920s. I didn't know in Germany anybody knew who Tom Mix was, but apparently he had a following in Germany.
HIT was almost invariably followed by LER. Even Hitler was helping to break the Enigma.
They were given the manuals, they were told exactly what to do and how to use the machine. But part of the problem was this myth that the Enigma machine was completely unbreakable. And this was buried deep in the German psyche. So therefore they thought, well, why bother? You know, nobody can break these messages if we use these keys because they're easy.
If you saw LON as the first thing, it was almost certain that DON was the second. MAD was RID. BER was LIN.
In the heat of battle, you put up dirty words, and I am the world expert on dirty German words. The worst message I ever had come near me was one from the German High Command to someone in Abwehr, the German intelligence, reprimanding them for using these words because did they not know that young girls were having to decode them? And of course, the young girl at Bletchley was devastated because they went on doing it, I might say, never mind the reprimand. But it was nice to think the Germans had that side of them, that they did think that perhaps they oughtn't to use dirty words in their encodements.
By 1941, Britain was losing the war. Despite Station X's success with the Luftwaffe, they had got nowhere with the Enigma of the German Navy. And it was the Navy that was now the problem. German U-boats were wreaking havoc in the Battle of the Atlantic. Every merchant ship that was sunk deprived Britain of the urgent supplies it needed to survive. Right from the beginning of the war, slow-moving convoys of up to 60 merchant ships regularly crossed the Atlantic to and from America. The United States had not yet entered the war, but American supplies were essential to the British war effort. Although these convoys were protected by escorts, they were still easy targets for the German U-boats. Hitler had entrusted Admiral Karl Dönitz with the task of destroying Britain's lifeline.
It was Dönitz who realized quite early on that he could defeat the Allies by bringing England to its knees by starving us. If he could break that North Atlantic route, then there could be no food, fuel, troops, munitions come to this country. And he could win that war by U-boats. And he nearly succeeded.
Dönitz tried to build up a kind of elite spirit, and everybody was proud to take part in that. And we were very eager to join that force. And of course, we had been brought up to adore taking risks in the National Socialist period when we were boys. So we were not really aware of the risk.
Dönitz built giant fortified U-boat pens on the French coast. From here, his U-boats could strike out into the Atlantic. The Germans knew that the British were protecting their ships by convoys. To get round this, Dönitz organized his U-boats into groups, wolf packs. As the slow-moving convoys crossed the Atlantic, wolf packs of 30 boats or more would lie in wait.
Almost every convoy, there would be losses. They were very crafty, these German U-boat commanders. They would anticipate our route and oft submerge in daylight just ahead of the convoy and let the convoy pass over them and torpedo right, left and centre, and we wouldn't know where the attack had come from.
The wolf packs were controlled by Dönitz by radio messages encoded on the Enigma. Breaking the naval Enigma was to be Station X's biggest challenge. If they failed, the Battle of the Atlantic and the war could be lost. Alan Turing was the right man in the right place at the right time.
Alan Turing was unique. I mean, he was a genius. And what you realize when you get to know a genius well is that there's all the difference between a very intelligent person and a genius. Now, with very intelligent people, you talk to them, they come out with an idea, and you say to yourself, if not to them, you know, I could have had that idea. You never had this feeling with Turing at all. He constantly surprised you with the originality of his thinking. It was marvelous.
Alan Turing was the most brilliant mind of his generation. He had become a Cambridge professor at only 23. His work on intelligent machines was years ahead of his time. Station X suited both his genius and his eccentricity.
He had funny manners, he didn't like wearing a tie, he always looked untidy, but he quite liked being out in the country where he cycled around. He cycled with a gas mask on during hay fever period. He didn't care what he looked like, he just thought that doing a job was what mattered.
He was very shy of women, particularly girls. I don't think he'd ever met any girls before. I did once offer him a cup of tea, and he shrank back as if he was going to be shot. And he used to, bless his heart, walk down to the canteen in a curious sideways motion, with his head down. But he was such a star. We all thought he was the most wonderful thing.
Alan Turing set himself the challenge of breaking into the naval Enigma. In an attic room at Bletchley Park, Turing began to unravel the secrets of the U-boat messages. All he had to go on were the scrambled letters. Incredibly, as he studied them, Turing was able to discover exactly how the Germans were hiding the key message setting. Unlike the Luftwaffe, the German Navy was leaving nothing to chance. Instead of letting the operator choose 3 letters at random for his message setting, he had to get it from a book. With practically no information to go on, Turing identified how the Navy operators selected their keys from a list for each day. He rightly guessed that to hide the key, these letters were encoded using secret tables, and that instead of substituting one letter by another letter, these bigram tables substituted pairs of letters. Turing worked all this out and got it absolutely right.
These codes were printed on rose paper in a ink that would immediately fade out if it got wet. So our orders were, in case of any difficulty, immediately to throw this material overboard or at least soak it in water so it could not be read.
Turing had made the first important breakthrough, but he knew that to crack the naval Enigma, they would first have to get hold of those secret bigram tables. Then came an amazing stroke of luck. Captain Fritz Julius Lemp was a hero of the Third Reich. His U-boat, the U-110, had sunk the first ship in the war. In May 1941, he set out on what was to be his last mission. David Baum had just turned 20. He was a sub-lieutenant on HMS Bulldog, on escort duty guarding the 50 ships in convoy OB318 from Liverpool, bound for America.
We were south of Iceland, and we knew we were being shadowed. You get reports back from the Admiralty, you're being shadowed by U-boats, and we always knew we'd be attacked in this area. Suddenly, 2 ships were torpedoed, one after another. It was obvious where the attack had come from, and the corvette Obrisha made a very accurate attack on the U-boat. Must have got the depth charges just for right depth.
Georg Hugel was the Enigma operator on U-110. He had been with Captain Lemp throughout the war.
Es fiel sofort das Licht aus. Das ist ja kein gutes Gefühl, wenn man im Dunkeln sitzt und nachher lediglich die Notbeleuchtung da aufleuchtet. Dann hat man natürlich Mühe und Not, da die Sicherungen wieder reinzubringen und zu überlegen, ja, kommt irgendwo Wasser.
It was a classic attack. Depth charges underneath the U-boat, blew it to the surface. It was a dream of every escort vessel to see a U-boat blown to the surface, because usually they just sink when you do have a successful attack and go down to the bottom.
This was just the chance that Turing and Station X had been waiting for. On board the U-110 were the secret bigram tables.
Wir unten im Boot hatten keine Ahnung davon, wie es da oben aussah, aber der Kommandant oben auf der Brücke, der rief dann ständig raus, raus, raus. Wir haben gefragt, was soll geschehen mit den Geheimsachen. Und bekamen wir eben die Order, alles liegen zu lassen und nur danach zu trachten, rauszukommen. Ich weiß nicht, daran kann ja wohl keine Kritik geübt werden. Kein Mensch kann sich die Situation vorstellen, der nicht selbst dabei war.
The Germans abandoned ship, leaving the codebooks behind. But Georg Hugel had one precious document he had to rescue, a book of love poems to his girlfriend.
Wieder zurück, habe dann noch einen kleinen Schrank aufgesperrt, wo die Schlüssel drin waren, holte den Schlüssel raus für den Betreffenden, wo also die Bücher und auch meines war. Holte das Büchlein raus, wollte es in die Tasche stecken. Das ging nicht, weil es doch für die Tasche zu groß war. Und dann habe ich also mein Hemd aufgeknüpft und habe es vorne reingeschmissen. Das lag mir dann also an der Brust. Und so bin ich dann nachher auch so ungefähr eine halbe Stunde geschwommen.
David Baum led a boarding party across to the stricken submarine. But what if the Germans had left an armed man behind to scuttle the boat? Baum went aboard first.
One couldn't imagine the Germans would have abandoned this U-boat floating in the Atlantic without someone down below trying to sink her. But at any rate, I got my revolver out. Secondary lighting, a dim blue lighting, was on. And I couldn't see anybody. Just a nasty hissing noise, which I didn't like the sound of. To this day, I don't know what it was.
The rest of the boarding party began to search the U-boat. They had no idea what they were looking for. They did not know about the secret bigram tables. David Baum had never heard of Station X.
I sat down at the captain's desk in his cabin, and suddenly, amongst all the things, I think his Iron Cross was there, and I put that into a bag, and there's odds and ends. But also I came across a sealed envelope. I didn't open it. I wouldn't have understood it anyway, not speaking German. But it obviously was something fairly important, being a sealed envelope in his desk. So I popped it into my pocket.
At the time, David Baum had no idea of the importance of what he and his boarding crew had found. The capture of U-110 was a disaster for the Germans and a treasure trove for Station X. The codebreakers now had the secret tables of the naval Enigma. Captain Lemp died in the attack. No one will ever know why he did not scuttle the U-boat or why he did not destroy the codes.
Das kann man jetzt im Nachhinein nicht mehr. Ich musste mich ja darauf verlassen, wie die Befehle waren. Ne? Nachdem der Befehl eindeutig war, das drin zu lassen und nach oben zu steigen oder zu klettern, da gab es keinen anderen Weg.
The only document on the U-110 that did not end up in British hands was the book of love poems to aid it. If Georg Hugel had rescued the bigram tables instead, things may have been very different. When the captured documents reached Station X, the codebreakers were ecstatic. Now they could begin to break the naval Enigma. King George VI called this the most important event of the war at sea so far.
The prize were the bigram tables, and they were magnificent. Although some of them had got a bit wet and we had to dry them. Geoffrey Tandy, having been at the Natural History Museum, had access to proper drying paper, which he brought down by a load. And we had to dry those and clean them up and distribute them as necessary.
Almost immediately, the results were evident. On June the 23rd, 1941, Station X decoded a U-boat message that would save a convoy. HX-133 was heading for England laden with supplies. The codebreakers revealed that a wolf pack of 10 U-boats was lying in wait. Armed with this knowledge, the Admiralty could set up a counterattack. The attack lasted 5 days. 2 of the U-boats were sunk, and the convoy arrived safely. Station X had joined the Battle of the Atlantic. But Britain was still alone. Germany had brought Europe to its knees. Defeat seemed weeks away. The decoded messages from the Enigma were gradually revealing the full extent of Hitler's plans. But no one anticipated what was about to come. As Hitler began his invasion of Russia in 1941, certain German signals were being decoded that gave cause for alarm. The SS and the German border police were reporting mass executions and the systematic slaughter of Russian Jews. It's now known that this was part of the Holocaust. At the time, no one anticipated the full scale of the genocide. But when Churchill saw the decodes, he wanted the whole country to share his outrage.
Since the Mongol invasions of Europe in the 16th century, there has never been methodical, merciless butchery on such a scale. We are in the presence of a crime without a name.
Churchill was taking a chance that the Germans would realize the Enigma had been broken and he would lose Station X. It was a huge gamble, but such was the horror of the crime. Even Station X had to be put at risk. Britain's situation was desperate. Her armies had been kicked out of mainland Europe. Her convoys were being sunk in the Atlantic. Her cities were being battered and bombed. Britain's one secret weapon was the intelligence coming out of Station X. It was given the highest rating of all, Top Secret Ultra.
The Germans didn't attach much importance to intelligence at the beginning. You don't if you're winning. They attached importance at the Blitzkrieg and winning the war quickly. We attached great importance to intelligence because we had our backs to the war and we had nothing else that we could rely on.
Step by step, the Enigma was giving up more and more of its secrets to the British codebreakers. And strangely enough, it was the Enigma's greatest strength that also turned out to be its greatest weakness. When an operator typed a message on the Enigma, the machine would replace every letter with a different one. The letter typed in would never come out as the same letter in the code. The Germans didn't realize it, but they were opening another door for Station X. The codebreakers soon worked out that if the coded letter could never be the real letter, they could use this to start unraveling the messages. As the intercepts were analyzed, it became clear that the Germans were using set phrases time and time again. It was soon possible to predict which message contained a particular phrase. Station X called these phrases cribs.
I remember Nieder mit der Engländer, down with the English. And of course, Heil Hitler. Heil Hitler was enormously valuable. I mean, you should never inculcate in your military anyway the tendency to have exactly the same phrase opening every statement of a great victory.
As military bureaucracy settled into routine, the Germans often sent the same message at the same time every day.
There was one remarkable one which we used to use sometimes to cheer us up as a sort of college yell, because it had such a wonderful rhythm. It went as follows. Nicht anfliegbar, nicht aufgebaut, Giffro, Düsseldorf, Popham 2. And you could imagine 6 or 7 adults who had nothing better to do on the night shift, reciting this and feeling a lot better afterwards, perhaps 2 or 3 times in some cases. I mean, that message in itself was pointless. All this said was, you cannot fly from this place, no building has taken place, signed off, whatever. It would have been much better if they hadn't sent it. From their point of view, it was simply the way into the code.
When they had decided on their phrase, the codebreakers then looked for it in a message. Finding the correct position for the crib relied on the flaw in the Enigma. The codebreakers lined their crib up against the coded message. As they knew the Enigma would never turn a letter into itself, if any pairs of letters matched, the phrase must be in the wrong position. They slid the crib along the message until they found a point where none of the letters were the same. This could be where the phrase was located. Given that head start, Station X could work out the Enigma settings for the next 24 hours. The codebreakers became so adept they would create their own cribs. They would ask the RAF to drop mines in a specific stretch of sea. The Germans would immediately send a message giving a grid reference for the mines. Station X knew the grid reference CF97 would be spelt out in the coded German message, so they used Caesar Fritz 97 as the crib to find the Enigma key. Station X called this gardening. By now, the codebreakers were not just learning about the Enigma, but also the whole system of war communication. They were rewriting the rules of the Code War. In the deserts of North Africa, a new German general was making a name for himself with his aggressive attacks on the British. Erwin Rommel was to become a major figure in the story of Station X.
My father was what you could call a warrior. He was more a soldier's general, not a paper general. He was very lucky in Africa, not having been wounded except one day when a British splinter from a shell hit his belt. But the splinter was sticking in the belt and not in his body.
Throughout 1941, the Desert War was swinging backwards and forwards across Libya and Tunisia as the Germans and their allies, the Italians, tried to capture Egypt. With no landlines for communications, North Africa was pure wireless war. The Enigma was vital to Rommel.
My father had never an idea that the German code was broken. He could not imagine that something like this could happen.
But Rommel had one major weakness. The German Africa Corps totally depended on their Italian allies to bring in supplies. Rommel's supply lines were a natural target for the British. The RAF knew that convoys of Italian supplies were crossing the Mediterranean to Rommel. The Italians sent Enigma messages to make the arrangements, and Station X read the messages. It was almost too easy.
I could not understand how Rommel failed to realize that we were breaking important signals. I mean, he was a superb general. He was winning. But then he started losing because his supplies were always sunk in the Mediterranean.
Station X knew which convoys were carrying what supplies. They could almost pick and choose their targets. To keep ultra-safe, however, it had to look as though the British knew about the convoys from some source other than the Enigma.
There was an absolutely rigid rule that we could not use Ultra unless, first of all, an aircraft had been sent out to reconnoitre. Once the Ultra had been proven by Germans seeing a British aeroplane looking at the convoy, then you could use it, but not until. They might very well say, I wonder how they knew it. But fortunately, they always deluded themselves by saying it must have been an Italian traitor in the Naples docks.
My father ended his life with a suspicion that there was a gap in the Italian High Command through which news escaped and arrived at the British side. But in heaven he must apologize towards the Italians and say I was wrong.
But as was to happen time and time again in the war, an advance in one direction was met by a retreat in another. And through a series of international events, Rommel was soon going to find fate working in his favor. The story began several months earlier in 1941, when a group of American codebreakers had visited Station X. Churchill was luring the Americans into the war by offering the secrets of Ultra.
Spies are not prone to share a great deal straight away. You know, it takes time for spies to warm up with one another, and even British and American spies. They played their cards very close to their chest.
Getting two countries' secret services to work together was unheard of. But against all odds, the visit was a success. From then on, the Americans would share the secrets of the Enigma, but that was going to play right into Rommel's hands. The New Deal meant that the Americans would be kept informed about North Africa. Reports on the British campaign were being sent in code to Washington from the US Embassy in Cairo. In August that year, an Italian working for the Americans, Loris Gerardi, got hold of the combination of the safe where the embassy's code book was kept. Gerardi copied the code without the Americans ever knowing. Now Rommel had access to British secrets. He knew what his enemy was up to. With the help of the American decodes, Rommel pushed the British back 300 miles in 17 days. The reports going back to Churchill told of disaster after disaster. The situation was critical. Churchill was putting enormous pressure on Station X to break the Enigma faster. Getting the rotor settings from the cribs was taking too long. Speed meant lives. One man had the answer. Alan Turing, the leading codebreaker at Station X, had achieved international recognition before the war. Ahead of his time, Turing was developing the idea of intelligent machines. He planned to automate the code-breaking process. Turing wanted to build a machine that would attack the heart of the Enigma, a machine that could work out how the German operators had set up their Enigmas for that day's messages. Once they had a crib, the codebreakers could find the rotor settings, but the process of getting those settings took too long.
Alan Turing's great breakthrough was seeing that finding out the rotor settings from that crib was something that could be done by a machine. That was the great starting point and brought the whole thing into the modern age.
Turing's machine could defeat the Enigma in minutes. It was called, strangely, the bomb.
An average bomb run was about 15 minutes. Occasionally, I heard we beat the Germans to the decryption. This happened when A would send B a message and B would almost immediately send back a message, a very short message which just said, "I can't read you." We would get the solution faster than the other guy could decipher the second sending. And if it was something hot, it could get out in the field before the German commander got his.
The bomb was a giant electromechanical machine which used drums to imitate a series of Enigma machines. The drums clicked round letter by letter, testing the thousands of possible Enigma settings, 20 every second, until the correct one had been found.
Before Turing, the perceived wisdom was, you've just got to go around searching for this one solution which will break a particular message. Turing said no. What you do is you use the mathematical technique of rejecting all things that it couldn't possibly be. So it was a very powerful search engine, but working in a negative sense, in that it rejected millions and millions of possibilities very, very quickly and arrived at the correct answer.
Station X was becoming a vast production line. By the end of the war, with over 200 bombs, the codebreakers were turning out 90,000 decoded messages a month.
The algorithmic process, as we'd call it now, by which the crib and the ciphertext were processed on these mechanical systems, they were the most advanced, most complex processes that had ever been used in the history of the world. I can't think of anything else with its logical and statistical sophistication. It's something you should think of as years and years before its time.
Churchill, still desperate for victory in North Africa, went to the desert to put his stamp on the war. He wanted results, and he wanted them fast. Out went one lot of generals, and in came another. Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery became the new 8th Army commander. It was now his job to defeat Rommel's Afrika Korps. He knew from Ultra that Rommel was about to attack, but where? Montgomery predicted the ridge at Alam Halfa.
Monty said, looking at the ground, he will go with the Alam Halfa ridge. Some days later, we decoded a signal from Rommel saying, I'm going to attack on the 30th of September, the Alam Halfa ridge, which is exactly what Monty had said. I think from that moment on, Monty was so confident of his own intelligence that he couldn't be beaten. He knew everything.
But Montgomery had another advantage. The American embassy in Cairo had realized their intelligence reports on the British campaign were being read by the Germans. They had immediately changed their code. Rommel no longer knew what his enemy was planning. Montgomery, however, was still receiving ultra from Station X. Soon, the German forces were under enormous pressure. But Station X was beginning to have reservations about Montgomery.
We felt that Montgomery did not trust the intelligence information that Bletchley Park was providing him with, because we believed in our own arrogant way that we were probably providing a service to the military that no other military had ever had in the history of warfare.
On the 23rd of October, the British went on the attack at El Alamein.
Our mandate from the Prime Minister is to destroy the Axis forces in North Africa. We are going to finish with this chap, Rommel, once and for all.
British intercept stations logged over 300 messages a day in the battle that followed. Station X knew Rommel's plans, his forces, and his losses. This was the intelligence war. Montgomery had promised to finish Rommel off. Station X was providing the information that would allow him to do that. On the evening of the 2nd of November, Rommel signaled Hitler for permission to retreat.
Alamein was marvellous because you had these desperate messages from Rommel saying, Panzer Army is exhausted, we've enough petrol for 50 kilometres, ammunition is contemptible, and so on. And we have between 11 and 17 operational tanks in the whole of Panzer Army Africa.
Hitler replied the next day, ordering Rommel not to yield a step, either victory or death. Montgomery read both messages within hours. At El Alamein, Montgomery's superior forces crushed Rommel. But when Hut 3 learned that Montgomery had allowed Rommel and the remnants of his army to get away, they were furious.
We told Monty over and over again how few tanks Rommel had got. So Monty could have wiped Rommel off the face of the earth. Why he didn't do so, why he didn't wipe it off the face of the earth, I simply do not know. Nobody else does. Why was the Hut 3 information not used? It was so full. I mean, that was our exasperation. We were giving Monty every conceivable information about the state of Rommel's troops, the number of operational tanks, which is terribly crucial. I mean, you know, enough, about as many tanks as could be parked on the lawn at the back of this house. And in desert warfare, no tanks and you're finished.
This is the BBC Home and Forces programme. Here's some excellent news which has come during the past hour from GHQ Cairo. It says the Axis forces in the Western Desert, after 12 days and nights of ceaseless attacks by our land and air forces, are now in full retreat.
Somehow war seems the natural state of affairs, and peace, when it comes, will take a hell of a lot of getting used to.
In December 1941, America entered the war. To Churchill's great relief, after Pearl Harbor, Britain and America were at last official allies. Churchill and Roosevelt knew that the secrets of the Enigma were vital to the Allies' success. Code-breaking was a major priority. Station X was to be completely open to the Americans. But as the war moved into 1942, and more messages from Station X were being sent to Washington, the new relationship was about to face its first real test. the Allies knew that to defeat Hitler, the Battle of the Atlantic had to be won. The decoded U-boat messages were sent every day to the British and American navies. If Admiral Dönitz ever realized that his messages were being read, all would be lost. On February the 1st, 1942, Hut 8 began receiving U-boat intercepts that gave them cause for alarm. Dönitz had changed the U-boat code. Station X could no longer read the messages. Their allies, the Americans, were not pleased.
Well, unfortunately, the British lost control of the Enigma, and America was left without the kind of vital information needed to protect its convoys. There were an awful lot of protests, and England was very hesitant to tell us that they had lost control of the code.
The British were trying to conceal the truth. German U-boats in the Atlantic could now do their worst. Station X could no longer find them. They had no answer to the new code. Allied shipping losses began to rise. Dönitz was taking no chances. The German Navy had changed the Enigma. They had added a fourth rotor. The revolving rotors with their maze of constantly changing electrical wiring were the secret of the Enigma. Introducing a fourth one increased the odds against breaking the code dramatically. Station X called the new code Shark. After 6 months without any breakthrough, the Americans were getting restless.
It got to the point where by mid-1942, the Americans declared that no matter what, they would go their own way and make sure they'd get their own independent capability against the German submarine menace and its code systems. And it became quite touchy as to whether or not the two sides would cooperate.
The Americans were threatening a takeover. Station X could become mere spectators in their own game. Something had to be done. The director of Station X traveled to Washington for a tough meeting. To keep the Enigma code-breaking at Bletchley Park, there would inevitably be a price. A deal was hammered out. American codebreakers were to be sent to Station X. The British had given away the family silver, and there was still the problem of the fourth rotor.
What I think bothered us most was the destruction of the merchant shipping and the destruction of the naval ships. And knowing that if only we could break this wretched code, we could save so many lives and sink so many U-boats.
In October, captured U-boat code tables arrived at Station X and provided the first real chance of getting back into the naval Enigma. With these tables, the codebreakers were able to uncover a weakness in the four-rotor system. When the Germans designed the four-rotor Enigma, they realized that it might have to communicate with other stations which used a three-wheel machine. So in one of its 26 positions, the fourth rotor did nothing. The new four-rotor machine became, in effect, an old-fashioned three-rotor Enigma. Station X worked out the settings of the first three rotors on the bombs, just as in the past, then simply ran through all 26 positions of the fourth rotor until they found the right one. Soon, the day's settings were on their way to America. After 10 months in the cold, Station X was back.
The excitement when we got back into the U-boats was terrific. I was on night shift and somebody came running and said, "We're back into the U-boats." And it was the one that was meant we were going to be able to go on getting into the U-boats. So that was terrific. It wasn't just a one-off, it was we were going to be able to do it steadily. Churchill was told as soon as possible. It was a great moment.
Once again, Station X could help protect the convoys, and within 7 months, the Battle of the Atlantic was over. What had started as a small band pitted against the Enigma was now a city of 10,000. Station X was readying itself for the decisive battle. By 1943, Hitler was on the run in Russia, the Atlantic, and North Africa. The tide of war had turned. It would only be a matter of time before the Allies would invade Hitler's fortress. "3,000 miles away in Washington, plans for another invasion were underway. The first American officers were being selected to go to Station X, the price exacted by the United States for its cooperation.
I remember vividly, a group of us were convened in a room there, and the moment we came in, they were told, "What you're going to hear today is something you will not discuss, and it means that you will never be put where you can be captured by the enemy." And I was picked to be the commanding officer of that outfit, and that's how I got to Bletchley Park.
The journey to England involved a bizarre cover story of being pigeon experts in signals, and also being checked out by an American unit who had never heard of Station X.
They asked us whether we'd had the Army General Classification test. They said they couldn't find our scores on our records. They said, "Would you mind taking the test?" And we said, "No, we don't mind." There were 5 of us. And so we took the test, and this sergeant graded them, and he came running out. He says, "Holy mackerel, what scores? You guys ought to be in intelligence." I don't think I'd ever met an Englishman in my life until that point. I don't know, I had been full of stereotypes about the English, the distant and have no sense of humor. And these were the most outgoing, wonderful people, fed us when it was quite a sacrifice. Just enough screwballs to be real fun.
It was the first time I'd ever been involved in my life in any serious discussion, either about war or politics, with an American. It was there that I learnt for the first time to drink tomato juice. It was the first experience I had with American coffee and American bacon. So in a way, America was introduced to me through this Bletchley prelude.
Against all predictions, the Americans fitted seamlessly into the life of Station X. The only rancor was to come on the field of sport, when the Americans challenged the British to a game of rounders.
We said, of course, we were delighted, our honoured allies. So the Americans came, and we showed them how they could play with it. They said, "What, no baseball bat?" We said, "No, we would just use this broom handle." So they said, fine. We played, it was a lovely day, we all played well. And at the end of the game, we all sort of clapped each other on the back, and the Americans said, "Well, we're sorry we beat you." And the British captain said, "I'm sorry we beat you." And that was a little bit of an incident, because the Americans said they thought they'd won, and we said we knew we'd won. And they said, "Well, what rules do you play by?" And we said, "Our rules."
But in the days to come, the Americans were about to learn of a secret even bigger than Enigma. Station X had discovered that the Germans were using a mysterious cipher machine, far more advanced than anything they had ever seen.
Now, we knew nothing about this cipher machine. It was kept completely secret by the Germans. And we first began to intercept radio transmissions in 1940. It was actually a group of policemen on the south coast of England. They were listening for German agent transmissions from within the UK. Of course, there weren't any because we'd captured all the agents. But they were still listening for these, and they heard these weird signals, and they sent them to Bletchley Park.
Station X now faced a new challenge. Hitler had demanded his own cipher machine, something faster and even more secure than the Enigma. Hitler's experts had devised a coding system based on the teleprinter machine. Teleprinters use binary code. It's not secret, it's used worldwide. But what the Germans had done was to connect the teleprinter to a machine which cunningly exploited the teleprinter language itself to produce their code. The secret German coding machine was called the Lorenz. It used 12 rotors to scramble the message, not just the 3 of the Enigma.
The Lorenz machine transmits a string of letters, each one of which is actually a mix of the real letter of the real message and a piece of machine-crafted gobbledygook, that a machine being of a diabolically complex craftiness. So at the end of it, what comes out and goes over the ether and is transmitted is a single string of total gobbledygook.
The Lorenz relied on a mathematical system called modulo 2 addition. This allowed the string of meaningless letters added to the message at one end to be removed from it at the other by the same mathematical process.
The operator presses a key on his teleprinter. That generates an electrical signal. The Lorenz machine then adds an obscuring character to this signal, and the result is then transmitted. At the other end of the link, another Lorenz machine set to exactly the same configuration regenerates exactly the same obscuring character, adds it back to the ciphertext, and by the magic of modulo 2 arithmetic they cancel out and leave you with the plain text.
The security of the Lorenz depended on the fact that it was adding a string of random letters to hide the real message.
But because it's a machine, it can't generate a completely random set of letters. It's what's known as pseudo-random. Unfortunately for the Germans, it was more pseudo than random, and that's how it was broken.
Station X gave the mysterious code the name Fish. They could work out that it was based on teleprinter language. How to strip off the obscuring code was anybody's guess. But on the 30th of August 1941, a lazy German operator gave the whole game away.
When he got to the end of keying in this nearly 4,000 character message by hand, the operator at receiving end sent back in German the equivalent of, "Didn't get that, send it again." And then, like idiots, they both put their Lorenz cipher machines back to the same start position. And then he began to key this long message again.
Ironically, the message need never have been sent. The operator was simply doing a test. Resending the message was allowing Station X to break Lorenz. The codebreakers could begin to see the different ways that the machine was adding random letters to the same message.
For me, the real excitement was this business of getting these two texts out of one sequence of gibberish. It was marvelous. never met anything that was quite as exciting, especially since you knew that these were vital messages.
Hitler and the German High Command never suspected that the Lorentz had been broken. It had taken Station X 3 months to break fish. And remarkably, they had worked out the mechanics of the Lorentz itself, a machine they had never seen. They even built their own machine to imitate it. As it was dealing with fish messages, they called it Tunny. Once the Lorentz settings had been found, Station X could use Tunny to turn the messages into plain German. Teams of codebreakers were needed to attack the Lorentz, but it was still taking weeks to break a single message, and by then the information could be useless.
It was a curious life. It involved mental gymnastics, and it could be very wearing, particularly if you didn't succeed. I mean, you could spend nights in which you got nowhere at all. You didn't get a single break. You just played around through this bleak long night with total frustration. And your brain felt literally raw. Your psyche or whatever it is felt frustrated, but your brain almost literally felt raw at the end of it.
But the whole process was about to be speeded up. At the GPO's research station in Dollis Hill, London, Station X found a brilliant young telephone engineer to help them. He believed he could build a machine that would do much of the codebreakers' work for them. The machine would be nothing less than the world's first programmable computer.
I tried to tell Bletchley Park what my ideas were, but you must understand that the technology that I was using was then only just known to very few people in the whole world.
Flowers came to Station X and was convinced that the answer lay in valves.
Tommy Flowers started in March 1943 with a blank sheet of paper, never been done before. I mean, Flowers was thinking of a machine with 1,500 valves in it. The biggest machine ever at that time had 150 valves in it, so this was an enormous leap into the dark. But Flowers was convinced he could make it work, and nobody else was, but he was. And so he started, more or less off his own bat.
We just told people to do things. We had the power, we had the authority to tell anybody, we had the first priority in the whole country for everything. And we could just tell people what we wanted and not tell them what it was for.
Just days before the invasion of Europe, Tommy Flowers installed the world's first programmable computer. Before the final victory, there would be 10 of them dealing with the secret messages of the High Command. They were given the name Colossus. Colossus could read a coded message at high speed and then search for the teeth patterns and settings of the Lorentz code wheels, and it could do this in minutes, not weeks.
Tommy Flowers realized that it was possible to read paper tape optically at very high speed, and this is going at 5,000 characters a second, 30 miles an hour that tape goes through there. And it's quite incredible that it can actually read information at that speed.
In fact, we did a test on how fast we could drive it before the tape broke, and we got up to nearly 60 miles an hour. So we decided that was a bit... when it did break, it went all over the place. It just just disintegrated.
Colossus was now ready for Operation Overlord, the biggest invasion the world had ever seen. Tanks and guns choked every main road, every street in southern England. The Allies were intending to deceive Hitler about where the invasion would take place. They planned to make the Germans think that an attack on Normandy was simply a diversion. Through double agents, the Allies leaked the word back to Berlin. It would be up to Station X to see if the deception was working.
The Germans were deceived for a very long time, far more than we expected and far more successfully. But we also got a bonus, if you like. That is, we knew they were deceived. Because from Ultra we could see that they were not moving troops into Normandy. They had to say to themselves, they'll pop over to Calais. The Germans were not only deceived, they were known to be deceived.
For Overlord to work, the Germans had to be fooled by the false messages and even a dummy army. Around the clock, Station X was hunting for the merest hint of German suspicion. June 1944. The invasion was poised to strike, but then Station X received a message.
Just before D-Day, Marshal Rommel, the Desert Fox, was appointed Inspector General of the Western Defenses, and he sent this enormously long message, very detailed description of the Western defenses, where each unit was located and what equipment they had. It was 70,000 letters, which was read.
When Station X decoded the fish message, it contained alarming news for the Americans. They were planning to parachute their troops into Normandy. They thought they had chosen a safe landing site.
They were going to drop one of the airborne divisions right on top of a German tank division. They would have been massacred. They changed it.
June the 4th. Reassured by the codebreakers that all was well, the massive army began to move forward. But there were to be other, greater forces at work that even Station X could not predict.
We went on duty that night, and they said, well, tonight is the invasion and they're going across. And so we slaved away. Well, of course, as everybody knows, by about 4 o'clock in the morning, the weather was so bad, they had to bring them all back, which, of course, was bad luck for us, because they then came and said, well, you can't go walking about Bletchley when you know that the invasion's going to be tomorrow night, so we just had to stay there.
"24 hours later, the Allies launched the biggest military invasion in history.
We had dinner, and we came out at 11 o'clock, and I suddenly started to hear a hum, and it got louder and louder and louder, and I knew what it was. And about 10 minutes later, the sky was black with aircraft towing gliders. And my friend said, I wonder what that is. And I said, I haven't the faintest idea.
And about 3 o'clock, I think it was, suddenly there was a real rustle. And very shortly the word spread that there had been German traffic saying that paratroopers were dropping all over the place. So we knew this was it.
Messages coming into Station X were showing that the deception plans had worked. Hitler's troops, split between Normandy and Calais, were unable to counter the onslaught. Over half the German forces had remained in the north, awaiting the Phantom Army. At Station X, those in the know about what was going on had been kept incarcerated for 48 hours. Even now, nobody was taking any chances.
We staggered out, feeling rather the worse for wear, but knew it was then general knowledge, and went home. And my lady I was billeted on said to me, "Where the bloody hell have you been?" And I said, "Well, I've been working." She said, "Well, you've missed all the fun." And I said, "What fun?" And she said, "Well, there was the invasion. It's been on the radio," because no television. "It's been on the radio." I said, "Oh, lovely, you know." And went to bed.
Tuesday, 6th of June, 1944. Invasion began. 10 a.m. breakfast. Letter from Maureen. Spent morning washing and ironing. On at 4. Life quite hectic. Feels somewhat anticlimaxy. Now the second front has begun. Not a bad day, really.
It had not been a bad day for the codebreakers either. They had accurately foretold the position of all but 2 of the 62 German divisions. Enigma and fish messages were read throughout Operation Overlord. The German High Command, the troops in the battle, had all unknowingly been speaking with the enemy. In the months that followed, Station X would continue to chronicle the disintegration of the Third Reich, right till the end of the war. Finally, at the cost of millions of lives, the Second World War came to an end.
When the final signal came through from Dönitz surrendering, it was in clear and not in code. And that was extremely interesting because you felt the war was then really over. When messages did begin to come through in clear, then all the secrets of the war really were beginning to fade into history already.
In the roll call of those who had brought about victory, the name of Station X would never be mentioned. Britain's best-kept secret was to stay a secret for the next 30 years. Churchill was hiding the fact that Station X had cracked the Enigma codes. The German machines were now in use around the world, and Britain wanted to go on eavesdropping. Churchill even spirited away some of the technology to serve in the Cold War. A few of the machines were going to be used to break Russian codes. The technology invented at Bletchley Park was so advanced that it could be used for years to come, as long as everything was kept secret. Even Colossus was to be destroyed. It was to be smashed up and buried.
That was a terrible mistake. I was instructed to destroy all the records, which I did. I took all the drawings and plans, all the information about Colossus on paper, and put it in the boiler fire. Saw it burn.
Tommy Flowers returned to the post office and was forgotten. In all the secrecy, Colossus never received recognition as the world's first programmable computer. Instead, the honors were to go to the Americans. The people dispersed, some back to universities, some into the fledgling computer industry, some to the organization which was to succeed Station X, GCHQ. The most famous alumnus of all The man whose inventiveness had been at the center of Bletchley Park's success died tragically. In 1954, Alan Turing took his own life after being persecuted as a security risk because he was homosexual.
Alan Turing is one of the figures of the century. The world of computing and now the world of the internet stems from Alan Turing's fundamental ideas. There were other great men in Bletchley Park, but in the long, long haul of history, I think Turing's name will probably be the number one in terms of consequence for mankind.
Station X had changed the face of the 20th century. The first computers had been invented here. The special relationship with America had been born here. Signals intelligence was created here and would become the way all wars would be fought in the future. In the end, though, Station X's greatest achievement will lie not in broken ciphers, but in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of lives it saved.
Historians generally agree that it shortened the war by 2 years. Bletchley Park didn't win the war. That was won by people with guns and bullets and things out in the field. But I think Bletchley Park is a great exemplar, particularly to the younger generation now, of brains over bullets. You can defeat an enemy intellectually, and that was shown here.